Welcome back to the Human Side of Emergency Management podcast. My name is Vivian Thompson and I am your host. Today on the Human Side of Emergency Management, I'm sitting with a leader whose story has been shaped not just by the crisis that she has managed, but by the humanity that she has brought to them. Carlene York served as a Commissioner of the New South Wales State Emergency Service between 2019 and 2024. The first woman to lead the SES and the first woman to lead a New South Wales emergency service. Across those 5 years, she guided the organisation through the Black Summer fires, the COVID years, and the devastating 2021-22 floods. She also carried the responsibility of State Disaster Controller, making decisions that affected entire communities in real time, often under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. But behind the title was a human being navigating the emotional weight of command, the grief of communities, the exhaustion of volunteers, the sting of criticism, and the quiet moments after the cameras had turned off, when the cost of leadership becomes real. Carlene has spoken openly about how the Northern Rivers floods hurt personally, not just for her, but for the volunteers who gave everything and still felt the weight of public expectation. Before the SES, Carlene spent nearly 4 decades in the New South Wales Police Force, leading major commands including Forensic Services, Northern Region, and Human Resources. She is a recipient of the Australian Police Medal, and her career has been defined by service, resilience, and a deep commitment to people. Today, we're here not to revisit headlines or operational timelines. We're actually here to explore the human story beneath them, the emotional labour of leadership, the courage that it takes to stand tall, and the wisdom that emerges when you carry a state through its hardest days. Gosh, I'm almost in tears. Carlene, welcome. It's an honour to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Vivian. It's great to be able to chat with you.
I just wanted to start off with a first question that's fairly easy. When you look back on your 5 years leading the SES, is there a moment, big or small, that captures the essence of what that role meant to you?
I think there's lots of moments, if I could say that, throughout the 5 years, and lots of challenges and really lots of rewards. Going to the townships that have been affected by floods would be, the thing that I remember the most, to meet with the community who were rebuilding their communities and to see the damage, but also to meet with those volunteers that had worked depending whether it was Yagara floods, Forbes, Northern Rivers, Hawkesbury, there's many to name. But those volunteers, are part of the community as well, and to have the community really understand what the State Emergency Service is there for and what they've done. I think that so not one moment, but, continually reassured, I suppose, that the volunteers were there, made me very proud of the organisation.
Yeah, definitely. It's when it sort of brings that huge reality when you meet people face to face, and I guess for a lot of us, we're there when the action's happening. We don't always get there after the event, and to see that. So in those early months, stepping into that commissioner role, what did you learn about yourself? Because as I talked about, you're in the police force for quite a while, so you're dealing predominantly in a different space. And then when you became commissioner, you then were dealing with a volunteer workforce. How did you find that transition?
Yeah, it's quite different to work for a volunteer workforce. There's comfort when you're in the police that you can go and look at a roster and see who's rostered on and see who's available and what they're doing, whether there's a car crew or intelligence or detectives, who's on that shift. It was a real shock then to go to the SES where they don't have a roster. And, people would say, how many volunteers are available today? And honestly, you can't answer the question. You have an estimate of numbers, but it depends on, are they working today? Are they not well today? Or will they come out anyway if there's an emergency, even if they're not rostered on? So that was a little bit daunting, I suppose, because I didn't have that comfort of knowing that I had a team, a number in the team that was available. And the other thing that struck me was quite different was there's no line of command for volunteers. So I was getting emails from volunteers when I first started as commissioner. And I
Yep.
thought, well, if I was the commissioner of police, there's no way that the constables would be emailing me as much with suggestions of how I could improve the organisation, what was good about it, and things like that. So I had to get a little bit used to, being there for the volunteers at every level, and very different to the command and control structure in policing. It goes through the ranks, and I think probably a little bit negative. It comes up in a filtered view unless you can get out and see the more junior staff. So yeah, I was a bit surprised, and I went out to my EA and said, do they always email the commissioner? And she said, yes, they do. So,
Yeah.
and I made sure I responded wherever I could to those emails as well.
It's funny you should say that. I've never really thought about it in that aspect. And I've worked in the paid and the volunteer, and I have actually emailed the commissioner directly.
Oh, right. With suggestions, I'm sure.
Not always in the negative space. Just,
No.
quite often I tried to start the positive stuff, but that's so true. So you led the SES through some of the most challenging times, of course, in New South Wales history. The fires, floods, the pandemic. What did leadership feel like from the inside for those times? Because, as you've already highlighted, there are differences when you're dealing with paid and volunteer.
Yeah, so when I first started, a term that's not used with leadership very much is it was very messy. I thought I'd be going in and that the Black Summer bushfires were happening, and that I would have time to, embed myself in the organisation, get to understand exactly what they do, meet a lot of people. But, within a couple of months, the first of the major floods came in 2020. And then COVID hit the next month. So the floods in February, and then COVID started, and, we started to have the lockdowns in the March. So my travel was restricted. We didn't have Teams and Zoom in those days. If people can remember back, it came in very quickly. And there was a number of vacancies in the organisation as well. So I had to change, my leadership style and try and, talk to people on the phone. We got teams in very quickly and just try and, get around to people through technology, which is quite different for volunteers because they do like to see you. They like to have you come out to their award ceremonies or training days, etc. And so, putting in plans for understanding the organisation and then looking at strategies to improve it was quite different than what you would normally do as a new leader coming into an organisation. So I just had to be a bit adaptable and flexible, I think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I guess a lot of us don't realise that when COVID hit, we were restricted to travel. We couldn't go out. But from a leadership perspective, that would have been exceptionally challenging and very, very difficult in terms of trying to connect with your people.
Yeah, so I could travel when there were events, and I could, justify the fact that I could go to headquarters, but there weren't the staff always there either. So sometimes you're walking through empty areas of the office because they were working from home. But then when you had an event, they would come, a number of them would come in to run the operations centre, obviously, through the emergency. But it was a different way to get to know the people than what you would normally do.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was actually working for the RFS right through the Black Summer fires, and at the end of it, because I'd already been through a major recovery process in 2003, I decided that I would resign and take time out for myself and just go back to the farm. But then COVID hit. And I remember my boss saying, Vivian, you should have stayed because you could have worked at home anyway. I just thought,
yeah, that would have been, I never thought about that. That would have been good. So.
I know you're talking a little bit about the floods and how difficult it was, and it wasn't just one flood, it was multiple events that were occurring under your leadership. One thing that I was interested in speaking to you about, because there was criticism, especially through the Northern Rivers floods, And the one thing that really struck me is you had said publicly that it actually hurt you personally. So I just wanted to touch on that a little bit because I mean, the podcast is about the human side of what we experience and what we go through and all gamuts. And so, but that period was so difficult on a personal and human level. I was just wondering if you can just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so the Northern Rivers floods, as a result of an east coast low coming in and then not doing what it usually does and hits the coast and then sort of peters out, and it just kept. It moved off and came back, and massive amounts of floods. And I knew the volunteers had been out, helping the communities and saving lives, particularly over a couple of really bad nights. And people have seen the vision where the Tinny Army had to come out and help us, and of course the other agencies are always there out with us as well. But the criticism, did really hurt because there was one day where I went to visit, one of the small towns. I think it was Woodburn. And I was talking to the unit commander there when a younger guy walked up to us, and he was, his uniform was dirty. He'd been out and it was about lunchtime, and he looked tired and bedraggled, and he just said to his unit commander, "Oh, sorry, boss, I've got to go now. I need to wash my house out." And I thought, then to get the criticism when they had left their own homes or, they had relatives and friends that, severely affected across that area, doing their best to save the community as well as they can, with the hazards of nighttime, unable to get helicopters up. The water was up to telegraph lines, so being in the boat was dangerous as well.
Dangerous,
But they were out there. And then the criticism did hurt me personally because I felt for the organisation, and a lot of volunteers, not from just Northern Rivers area, contacted me just to say how disappointed they were of that criticism. But, I acknowledge the community were distressed and feeling anger, about the whole event. And, we're one of the front facing organisations. So, but, as time went on, I think we were able to present evidence to the government that, that we were at that time understaffed and under-resourced, and, all credit to the government. They provided a lot of money and resources for the organisations to grow so that we're not put into that position again. And one of the things that you need to remember about those floods is the forecast was for the whole eastern seaboard from Victoria to Queensland. So Queensland were flooded and couldn't come and help. We couldn't move resources around like we normally would. They had to be in their own communities. So we were really stretched. And, it was interesting for me because there was a number of submissions I'd already put up to government and, under consideration, but things can move a bit slowly.
Yeah.
And then obviously we had the terrible events of the Northern Rivers floods. And then as we went through those years, more floods, particularly in the western parts of New South Wales. And I remember going to Hawkesbury and looking when I first started across the river and thinking, oh, gee, how could it ever get up to the top of that cliff on the other side of the river? And then the next time I was on a boat and you couldn't even see the cliff. We're about 6 feet, a couple of metres over the top of that land on the other side. So, it really does affect the community. And, I was disappointed for the organisation for that, for our volunteers and for our staff too. There were people on the call centres unable to get people out to those, ringing for help. But we saved a lot of people. And as I said, we had a lot of support from other agencies. And, the Tinny Army is, often spoken about up there as being a great resource as well. And, it's the challenge of getting spontaneous volunteers, I suppose, out for us as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, with the climate changing, catastrophic events are becoming more catastrophic in a lot of respects. And as you pointed out as well, it's the same sort of thing that we went through with the Black Summer fires. That it wasn't one event where you could just chuck everything at it. It was multiple events, but over a very long distance. And so it became so overwhelming in some respects for the community. They're quite often focused on their little patch, but there's a bigger picture that we have to deal with at the time. So I'm interested, is there a moment from those floods that sits with you even to this day?
I think the moment was the night where, we've seen vision of people on the roofs of their houses. Lismore particularly, but it wasn't just Lismore. There was many smaller towns that were affected. And, people base their actions on past events. And as you say, they have been getting worse, as our floods have shown, and consecutive, record floods each year that I was the commissioner. And so, making plans about going up to the first floor was a very good strategy in the past. But on this occasion, it went up to the ceiling of the first floor. So, we had people on roofs, we had people in roofs, we had volunteers with angle grinders in their boats cutting, the tin roofs open. And as I said before, very restricted in being able to get helicopters up because it was night time and it's dangerous flying. That really struck home to me, the intensity of what we can see and of the floods. And a little bit before that, when I first started, you talk about, things being across a large area as well as a long time, is after the bushfires, when we went into the floods, a lot of volunteers had been helping the Rural Fire Service and were running out of work time to be able to come and deal with the floods because they'd been such a long, serious, complex set of fires. And, SES is a support agency, not leading it, but it still takes volunteers' time. And so if you're running your own business or you were, entitled to your few days off as volunteers to help SES, they were running out of days. And so we had a challenge with resources even back in 2020.
Yeah, certainly chews it up. I know when I was working up around Glen Innes with the fires, I was working as a rural liaison officer and I had 2 SES people supporting me when I was going out in the field every day.
Yeah. And likewise, I'm sure that happened with RFS when they came to help us with the floods, that they'd been, fighting these, amazingly large catastrophic fires. And then turning around and we're saying, can you come and work for SES for a while, So, it's quite amazing what the community does in volunteering for our emergency services. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So leaders in these sorts of positions, and I've had, a couple of conversations with people through leading through these disasters. We often carry things privately that the public don't see. What was the hardest part of the job that no one ever asked you about?
Well, I wouldn't say no one asked me about, because the hardest part is just backing up each day with confidence that you're in control and, you've got this sorted and you're helping the community and you want to give them confidence. So if you think about a day through some of those really large events, I'd be up at sort of 5:30 in the morning, out at Homebush at the operations centre by about 6:30, ready to brief the Premier at 7:30, ready to go on the press conference at 8, to let everyone know what happened overnight, what we were planning for the day, working with the Bureau of Meteorology about what the weather was going to bring. Then running the response all day and liaising with all the government departments and, watching what the weather was doing and working with my different commanders across the area or the state, wherever the flood was, and then grabbing some sort of dinner that they bring in and leaving at about 7:30, 8 o'clock and going home and then doing it all again tomorrow. And you can't not be there. The pressure now on the commissioner to be present at all times is immense. Whereas, some years ago when I was in policing, they'd hand over to a deputy and you'd share some of the workload. And that's become quite difficult now for commissioners. So it wasn't that I wasn't asked about it because, I was really thankful to some of my fellow commissioners and chief officers across Australia and New Zealand who would ring and say, is there anything else we can do? Do you need more resources? But they would always ask, how are you feeling? Are you going okay? So it's a very collegiate group, very caring group, and I appreciated those phone calls. But I'm sure, if it hadn't been for my husband sort of running the house and helping out on that end, because I was just living and breathing, the response to the floods, nearly 24/7 and trying to grab whatever sleep I can and get ready and try and make sense of it in my tired head the next day.
Yeah, no, it's that background behind you that absolutely supports you. I know back in 2003, I was actually part of a neighbourhood watch group. and they actually all got together and made some meals for me. Just
That's
dropped them
nice.
off. And because they could see everything that was happening, and they could see that I wasn't home every day, that I was just out, and kids were here, there, and everywhere.
Well,
But, yeah, no, so I never ever forget that. They were very, very
yeah.
supportive.
And it helps. That bit of
It does.
caring thought helps, and then you get a reasonably good meal as well, so that's great.
Yeah. And they'd even made muffins and put them in the freezer for me because I
Uh,
said, "What do you want, Viv?" And I said, "Look, I'm time precious at the moment, so just whatever I can just grab and go."
oh, yeah, that's right. So they looked after you. That's nice.
Yeah, no, it was. Because I was actually gonna ask you about how you looked after yourself during this time, because in the middle of this relentless crisis, 'cause you still have to look after yourself because you have to be there, you want to be there, and you got so much that you need to give and to support, but at the same time, you still have to look after yourself. Because I know in the Black Summer fires, I'd come home, and we were still busy with a bad fire season back in our zone, as well as having to go away all the time to support the whole of New South Wales. And my partner would make sure that he'd make me sit in the spa, and I'd just like verbal diarrhea for 10 or 15 minutes because you just automatically relax, and then
Mm.
you just talk and you just sit there and just listen. And to this day, I just found that so useful for me.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think having support at home is extremely important.
yeah,
And as you say, just being able to download and talk about the day or, funny things that might have happened or frustrating things that might have happened. But I think in all seriousness is it's going to end. You don't know when it's going to end. But if my volunteers are out there every day putting their life on the line or working in the, operations centre or whatever role they were doing and they keep coming back and coming back, the
yeah,
least I could do is keep coming back every single day. Because I'm thankful that I'm in an office, right? It's mentally challenging, but I'm
yeah.
not out, on a boat, trying to rescue people or having to chop down the trees or put tarps over roofs or whatever the volunteers were doing. And I'm not taking it away from those that are in the background supporting those frontline volunteers either. But it's a team effort, right? And you just push. I think human nature is you just push yourself. And like I say, it is thankful that it's going to end. But some of those operations just went on longer than we would ever have imagined. Particularly the Western floods, 2023, 24, when, it starts from the Queensland border and then just flows through and that those towns are going to get affected. And
Yeah,
it's just like leapfrogging from one town to another town to another town until, we push the water down to Victoria or out to South Australia. So that's challenging as well. That was quite different than the Northern Rivers floods, which was full on, extensive, for a short period of time, whereas the others, the Western River region floods, just went down the rivers, and the poor communities downstream were just waiting till they were next. So, yeah, very challenging times.
and it's so eerie sometimes standing in those environments because you know what's going to hit, but
Mm.
everything's so calm and so peaceful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
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 that's right. But the water's coming, and listening to the reports, and often,
yeah.
um, there's rain as well. It's not just the river flowing down. So yeah, quite demanding on some of these more remote communities as well.
Absolutely. Now, you were the first woman to lead a New South Wales emergency service. What did that visibility mean for you personally?
Yeah, I was really proud of being the commissioner at the State Emergency Service. Um, I also, at that time, was a part of AFAC, which is the Australian Fire and Emergency Services Council. And I got to be president of AFAC as well at the same
Yep.
time. And I was equally proud of that because I was the first female, but I was also the first commissioner of a state emergency service in Australia. And I think that, to me, as SES are a smaller organisation than our other emergency service agencies, and a little bit, I thought at that time, a little bit underrated. It was very fire centric, and it was, really great to be able to shine the spotlight on the state emergency service. I'd done a lot of work, or I'd felt I'd done a lot of work in the police, about gender equality, and certainly, had a few roles leading some of the areas to promote the diversity of the New South Wales Police Force and get more women. Not many women in it when I first joined. And so then to be, the first female commissioner was pretty important to me. One, it was a personal achievement that I was proud of, but two is, the sayings about you can't be what you can't see. And so to me, giving other women, the idea that they can achieve, maybe not to be commissioner, but to be prominent in a role that they're proud of, I think is, really important to me as well.
Oh, absolutely. And that goes through a lot of the services. I mean, it's especially the fire services as well. And I've spoken about this with a lot of the work that Greg Mullins did for fire and rescue, and I've got other people that are going to be coming on and talking about this space as well. It's such an important thing. But I know when some environments I go to and I'm the first female, it's like, yeah, whatever. But then there's other environments you go into and you're in the minority being a female. It's just like you got to work really hard and be 10 times better. Did you feel the weight at all about being the first? Because it's so different for every single person, but I think when you're the first, you can talk about it with great authority. And then one thing that we've always said in the agricultural space as women is when you're going up the ladder, you put your hand down and you help someone else to come up with you. Because when you do eventually move off, retire, move off to the side, go up even further, whatever, you want someone there to follow in those footsteps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one of the things that, I was really adamant or dedicated to do is get that pool of women that could come up again. Now, I acknowledge that not all women want to do promotion, but you want to make the workplace as good as what they wish it to be. You want a safe environment. You want them to have opportunities, whether it's courses, or you want them to be able to have choices to balance their life if they have caring responsibilities for parents or children or whoever. But it is important for women to be promoted and to get into senior positions because conversations are different, decisions are different, and they add a great deal of value into the workplace. So, it's difficult to be, promoted and get into these senior positions. Sometimes the challenges of the pressure that you're under, but it's so rewarding as well. So I don't want to scare women because to go into those positions, but some don't want to take it on, but we need to give them every opportunity to make their life choices, which are important. But certainly organisations, the research shows organisations are better off with a diverse workforce and diversity in leaders as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's diversity across all areas, not just male and female as well. What would you say to women stepping into leadership roles in high pressure, male dominated environments? I guess because emergency services generally is still fairly male dominated.
Yeah, particularly the paid firefighter organisations across not just in Australia, New Zealand, other places of the world is still very male dominated. I mean, policing is still male dominated, but the numbers are slowly improving. I'd say give it a go. I mean, I've had lots of rewarding experiences in taking on different roles. Sometimes, and particularly even the state emergency service, I didn't have all the knowledge about floods and storms and things like that. But leadership is about looking after your people, making decisions that you think are right. I always wanted to leave wherever I was in command. I wanted to leave at a better place than when I found it, which looking back, I'm hoping the people who worked for me would agree that it was better than when I, got into those positions. And same with SES, even though we had the terrible floods and the demands, the rewards of getting the extra resources, pleading with government about how we could fix some of those problems. It's rewarding when you get that. So for any woman who wants to go in these positions, do it, but create a network of support as well. So, it can be quite lonely. And you want, it's said time and time again, you want women not to be the first, just that there are women there. So, And we need those dynamic women to step up to these jobs, and it's just a great opportunity. It's a really, I'm a positive person, and I've just had such a wonderful time in policing, but in SES as the commission of being able to lead a great organisation was very rewarding as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it helps when you've got really great mentors as well. I mean, when I started off in firefighting, I think there's a handful. I think there was 2 or maybe 3 in leadership roles. But I had some really great mentors that supported me very openly, and I was forever grateful for having them, and they had my back as well. But you touched there on volunteers in that, because um, quite often when I go into like brigades and stuff, the women volunteers don't always have the opportunities to take on those roles. But quite often, if you present them with those opportunities, they're very keen to pick them up.
Mm.
And I know quite a few years ago when I was talking about the lack of leadership for women in the area, in the zone that I was working in, and I remember someone just turned around and said, "Yeah, but they've never told me they wanted to be a leader." And I'm just going, "But you've never given them any opportunities. You've never done any encouragement." Anyway, it was a bit of a group think, and it was a very interesting time at me on a different process to then start ensuring that there was opportunities. In terms of the volunteers, the one thing that you've touched on quite a lot is they give so much of themselves. And what did they teach you about your leadership in terms of about the service? And I guess what I'm trying to get to is the humanity, that human side of what we do.
Yeah, I mean the volunteers do give so much, and as a leader of a volunteer agency, you have to be very cognizant of the fact that they don't have to come back tomorrow. It's not like, and this is different from my experience in policing as well. Not that there aren't police who are dedicated to do what they do, but you've got that extra tie that they're actually employed and getting paid. And so there are public service rules about that. They come to work, they get paid, etc. But volunteers, if they're not happy, you don't even know they're not going to turn up tomorrow. They don't have to report to you. They don't have to resign or anything like that. They just lose interest. And so, it's really important to make sure that, they feel valued. And, we spoke a lot as a leadership team about what motivates volunteers and how could we make sure that they keep getting motivated. Like, is it for volunteers, well, obviously one is they're helping the community and their community, but they go, as you said before, Vivian, to other communities that are not their own to help out, interstate, overseas. But also there's the social connection and interaction. There's a feeling of a broader family, a second family to what they have at home. And there's, some people are quite isolated and the only social connection is they have through volunteering. Some are older and would have retired out of work, but still come and, we had one fellow that, just came in one day a week he'd have morning tea, but his job was to just make sure all the equipment was right. The chainsaw blades were sharp and he was really
Valued.
valued for what he did.
Yeah.
And the team knew they could go in, run out to an event, take the equipment and it would all be operational. So, as I say, the leadership team and I spent a lot of time trying to make sure that we understood the reasons for volunteering, not just one reason, and how we could try and ensure that people felt rewarded and valued for what they did, which is really important. And it might mean me visiting or one of my team visiting their training night, or it might be presenting the medals and certificates of appreciation from the commissioner's office. All different strategies to be able to make sure that they knew that they were a part of a bigger team and were valued and we wanted them to stay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when we talk about emergency services, and you were saying before, you're a very positive person and you like to stay positive. I'm the same. So there's moments where I can look back in over my career and there's just a couple of moments that just really stick out. But was there a moment of connection or kindness that really stuck out for you that was that has stayed with you? And in terms of the reflection of what you experienced?
Yeah, probably if I thought about it more, there'd be a number. But there was one just about my leadership, I suppose. When I was up in Northern Region for the police, I was being transferred out as the commander down to be the commander of human resources. And so obviously we have a morning tea and a bit of cake and things like that to say goodbye, for them to say goodbye to me. And one of the officers stood up and gave a speech, and he said that my leadership style was like a kite. Oh no, this is a bit strange. And he brought a kite in. He had a kite as he was saying this speech. And he said, I'm the sort of leader that lets the kite fly up in the wind, but always hangs on to the rope so that you don't let them go off, because that would be unsuccessful for the kite to fly if you think about the picture. But you're always just tugging the rope slightly just to make sure that it's working at its best. And that really, really was valuable to me. To me that's a good sign of a good leader, is allowing people maybe a couple of mistakes or whatever, but the kite keeps flying, but you
Yeah.
never just let it go and just let it fend for itself. So I still refer to that to this day, that was a moment when I felt appreciated, but thought my leadership style must be not too bad, because he reflected on that, and he presented me with the kite at the end of it, and I've still got it. So yeah, that was pretty special.
Yeah, no, that's great. An analogy I hadn't actually thought about before, but it's so true. You got to let them go fly in their own right, but you
Mm.
still got to be there beside them
Yeah,
and support them. Yeah.
yeah.
If there was one bit of advice that you could have given yourself back in 2019, just before you started as commissioner, or when you started on your first day, what would that be?
Yeah, watch what you wish for, I think. Um, I never knew that we would go through such challenging times in the SES. And, I remember driving into state headquarters down at Wollongong, and, I was told where my parking space was, and it had the sign commissioner. And I sat in the car and thought, wow, I'm the commissioner, and what weight is on my shoulders for that. But it worked out fantastically, and some would not, I think, jump into that sort of responsibility, not knowing everything about an organisation, because I'd been in the same organisation for nearly 40 years, right? And I knew a
Yeah.
lot of people. I knew the systems. I couldn't go anywhere and not see someone that I knew, and you feel very comfortable and you get very comfortable. But this, it was a really good opportunity for me to give myself a challenge and go into another organisation. So, yeah, so the advice was, don't be afraid of the unknown, because if you've got the skills to do it and you've got the passion to do the job, and you rely on other people who've got the skills in floods or whatever the organisation is responsible for, but you still go and do it, because you will be successful.
Yeah, it's one thing about emergency services is we have a very strong team ethic, because
Mm.
without a team, you're never going to be successful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's exactly
uh,
right.
yeah, and especially when you're in those high stakes situations, you need to rely on the person that's standing next to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you need to know that the training has been done, the skills of the team are there. Not everyone has to have, you don't want everyone to have the same skills. But yeah, when you're confronting an emergency event, your training and professionalism comes into play. But it doesn't mean that outside of those, you don't value what people's thoughts are as well, and ideas. So,
yeah.
there's a time to be consultative, and there's a time to be command and control, and you have to remember, the differences between each.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you hope people understand about the humans being behind the emergency services, the SES, the ones who lead, the ones who respond, the ones who volunteer? Because I guess from a public perspective, there's an expectation there, but there's
Mm.
also a human element. I know you've touched on things like, they've still got a job, they can't sustain being away for long periods of time at multiple events, all these sorts of things. But in terms of the people themselves, is there something there that you would want the general population to try and understand about our volunteers?
Yeah, I think firstly, the general public often think they get paid to do this, and these people are willingly giving up their own time to help the community through whatever is happening. But they're just like your mum and dad, or your brother, or if you're older, your children, or your next door neighbour. They're just ordinary people who go and do extraordinary things for the community. So, they can be um, challenging, I suppose, for the community to understand that, they have to leave their home. They have to go into the unit usually and get the equipment. Then they come out and they're doing it for the love of what they do, or whether it be, and I always try and remember, it's not just the front line, it's other people on the radio, it's other people doing public messaging or warnings. They're working together with the staff to help the community. So I think that the message to the community is, don't be too tough on these people. They're giving up their time not only to respond, but there's a lot of time they give up to do their training or to
Yeah.
be trainers to train others as
Yeah.
well as going out as well. So there's a lot of time and effort put in by these people that help our emergency service organisations, not just SES, but there's lots of volunteers and lots of jobs that different people can do. So I'll put in
Yes.
a challenge to others to
Yep.
think about volunteering. Do you want to be, if you've got communications experience, for example, you can help in the warning space. If you have mechanical experience, you can help in our fleet section. There's all sorts of different things, and it's not just picking up a chainsaw. The good thing about SES too is we have a lot of people who have disabilities, and they can come in and there's always something that those people can do. So yeah, it's a great environment, and there's no age barrier too, which I really,
Yes.
sometimes the community looks at them and says, oh, there's old people in rural fire service and there's old people in SES. We don't have a retirement age. As long as they are willing and capable to
That'll
do
be
what they do,
great.
we're very happy to have their experience, even if it's mentoring some of our younger or more inexperienced people coming through. They've all got an important role to do.
Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes I think we forget, and the community would probably not be aware that there's a team behind the team
True.
to make sure those people that are out in the field can do everything that they can do successfully and are supported in the best way possible to do that. And yeah, there are lots of roles in that support mechanism to be able to do that, and you don't need to be super fit or superhuman to be able to
No.
undertake those roles.
No, but I remember, I met one volunteer who was, I'm not saying older lady. She was probably over 60, and she wanted to be trained in roof storm damage. And I know when I went to the unit, there was a couple of young guys and said, they're just saying, we're going to help her. She is going to do it. And, a couple of months later, I got an email saying, yes, she'd qualified to be a storm repair person that could get up on the roof. And she was so excited about it. And I thought, and it's like you say, you don't have to be that fit. There are lots of other things to do, but you can, once a lot of volunteers get in, they see other opportunities as well. So they get interested in getting other things, qualifications or
Yeah.
doing other jobs or whatever. And you get a chance to travel as well. You can go to other
Yeah.
communities
Yeah.
and
Yeah, no, it's interesting because I have a lot of people say, "Oh, I could never be a firefighter. It'd be too scary." I said, "Yeah, well, work on the radios. Work in the transport area, we've got to have stuff brought out to us in the field. There's still a lot of areas that you can actually be involved in and be a valued part of
yeah,
that team."
exactly. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, in terms of your leadership now, after everything that you've been through and everything that you've lived and everything that you carry to this day, what does that leadership mean to you now?
Yeah, I look back. I'm still working a little bit, so I'm on the board of AFAC, and I'm also on the board of Girls on Fire,
Girls
which
on
is
Fire.
trying
Yep.
to get young women interested and motivated to join a fire or emergency service. But I look back at my career, and I've been really thankful for the opportunities I've been given. Every job I've done, I've thought is the best job in the world, and then I go to another one. So I was prosecutor for years, and as you said earlier, I run Northern Region Forensics, HR, all very, very different commands, and it really helped me sort of. I think prepare to be a commissioner, which was great. So lots of skills, lots of seeing other leaders, good and bad, lots of working with teams. And so I've obviously slowed down a little bit. I look at when it rains, I'm thankful for the garden that's raining. I don't worry like I used to worry when I was in SES. But yeah, I feel that I'm quite rounded in my leadership skills, which is great, and more confident to put up my hand for things that I might not have done some years ago. But yeah, very thankful that I had SES and policing, so two different careers, just different ways of working. So yeah, it's rounded off my leadership skills, I think.
Carlo, we've covered so much in this conversation, but there's one thing I do want to just touch on briefly, because I know when you were working for the police, Malcolm Naden, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, had committed some serious offences and was on the run. And I know we've had two cases recently as well where the same sort of thing happened. But from memory, I think he was on the run for 7 years. I just wanted to ask you briefly about that, because you were heading that task force trying to locate him. And I know in terms of that leadership role that you would have performed, there would be vastly different to the experiences that we've just talked about, because you're in a structure. You're dealing with someone who's violent, who's broken the law and you trying to protect the community, but at the same time, you can't tell the community what's happening because this person was on the run. I just thought, could you just expand a little bit about on what was involved in that style of leadership, because it's very different to what you've experienced with the SES?
Yeah, it was quite a challenge leading that task force. So he had been on the run for around 7 years, and he had been wanted for an alleged sexual assault and possibly two murders. And he had escaped multiple operations over the years. But when I was in charge of Northern Region, we did have an operation run by the command that bordered Northern Region when they came in over the mountains near Gloucester. And he shot a police officer. Luckily, the police officer survived. But that certainly ramped up, I suppose, our response. And the commissioner made a statement at the time that we will stay here until we catch him. And I was the commander, knowing that we'd tried over 7 years, multiple operations, and he always evaded us because he lived in the bush, and he would break into remote cabins. The difficult thing as a leader, it was certainly different than running the operations in SES, but the media intensity was pretty much very similar. And we had over 400 officers through that task force over the 4 months till we caught him. But we knew we had intelligence that he would break into some of these houses where there were newspapers lying around. He'd break in to get food and coats and boots, and he had stolen, we believed, and after the shooting, confirmed that he had stolen at least one firearm, if not more. A lot of shooters used these cabins and kept their equipment there. And he would get on the computer, or he would be able to listen to the radio. So early on, when it was really crisis response, it was good to tell the media that we're there. We've got the helicopters. We had them flying over the land where he was for a long period of time. We had search parties going out daily. But after a while, when you get into that sort of more planned strategies of trying to locate him, of strategies to make sure that we knew where the houses were, who was there, telephone numbers of owners and things, it became more difficult to be able to tell the community what we were doing. And there were a number of messages that I needed to get out. One is, if he was listening, that we were still chasing him, or we hadn't packed up like some other operations when we lost sight of him. Two is to the community that we weren't giving up, we were still there. Also, the messages that I was giving, he could have been hearing or reading or being on the TV in these cabins. So there was a lot of pressure from the community about, what are you doing? It's all pretty gone silent, and there was a lot of pressure by the media, and similar to, as I say, to significant events about, that always knowing what you're doing, but this time different because I couldn't say what we were doing. Like, we were starting to put devices in premises so that it would go off if he entered the premises and warn us. Well, I couldn't tell him that, because then he'd know, some of the strategies that we were using. So That was very stressful. Another 24/7 job, as well as running the region. But looking after the police, looking after their RFS were fantastic and gave us tents and beds and sleeping bags and another
Mm.
joint operation. But yeah, a lot of pressure being the commander to, in your messages, reach a number of different bits of the population, whether it be him, whether it be the community, whether it be the police working on the task force. Yeah, that's the media can be very demanding in what
Demanding,
they
I can
want to know
imagine they
because
would be,
and
yes.
demanding in time as well. So,
Yeah.
I was trying to balance. We wanted to get the messages out to the communities, by the 6 o'clock news. So therefore, you have obligations, um, or I felt I had obligations to assist the media to make sure that I tried to meet their timeframes so that they could get these messages out. Um, and, there was a smaller country media that wanted information about their town as opposed to Sydney that wanted different information. So, as a leader, you've got to take all into account all the demands and then, obviously decide on the method and the strategy of the communication that you're going to use. But yeah, very much daily demands with them perched outside the gate where our police were sort of sleeping and working. So yeah, a challenge.
And it there would have been so many unknowns. I mean, I guess you could track a certain amount about where he was going, what he was doing. So what was that moment like as a leader when you first heard, "We've got him"?
Yeah, it was pretty exciting, and it was about. I'm thinking back. It's probably about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. So and the rules were that I was the only one as the region commander that could give permission for police to break into a home. So I knew that they were out there, and I knew that they had him cornered in a house. Didn't mean that he wasn't going to be able to escape. He'd escaped a few times for us. But we had a lot of police up there at the time. So when they rang me, the first thing I said was, "Now, can you just repeat that? Did I hear that right?" And then they said, "No, we've caught him. It's true. We've got him." So it was exciting. I wanted to go straight out to Gloucester to be with the troops to thank them, but the commissioner had other ideas and had to drive down to, or be driven because it was quite late, down to Sydney to do the press conference to let the community know that we had caught this offender, and he's subsequently, I think, doing a couple of life sentences in jail. So yeah, very rewarding. The police did a fantastic job in that. And again, motivated, go out every day. And we had some terrible, terrible weather conditions because it was over the summer, but it was one of the, I don't know, rain must follow me because it was one of the wettest summers that we'd had. And so there were leeches and snakes and all sorts of
Yeah.
demands. Rivers flowing in the afternoon that weren't there in the morning, and really horrible conditions that they would go out every day in. So very thankful to them.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that feeling and the emotion that you would have felt in that moment, knowing that we've got him after all that effort, after 7 years,
Mm.
and knowing that the community could now feel safe.
Yeah, I mean that was a really good feeling because subsequently he said he would have shot anyone who tried to stop him. So that was reinforced the danger, I suppose. But it was about at the 3 month mark. I was starting to think is how can we continue this
Mm.
operation at such a speed and the number of police that were coming up. I think they were doing sort of 4-day sort of cycles, and people coming up from Sydney and relieving the last crew, and I was starting to think how can we get out of this when the commissioners said we're there till we catch him, and there were a couple of weeks went by and we
So
wouldn't have
that's
any
huge
indication of where he
expectation, isn't
was.
it? Yeah.
So, and then thankfully, you'd have a sighting or you'd get a fingerprint from a break in on one of the houses, and that would keep us going. But yeah, it was a very difficult one of how do you pull back on this when you know that there's a dangerous fellow in the bush. So it was nice to know we caught him. It was good.
Absolutely. And I'm sure the community was very, very grateful for that as well. Carlene, you've had an extraordinary career, and I know it's not over because you've still got a lot to offer. And I know, especially with the work that you're doing with Girls on Fire and also with AFAC. Um, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing this conversation with you. Now, there's one question I generally ask at the end of my guests. And that is when everything falls away, the roles, the expectations, and all that pressure, what remains at the core of your leadership that still drives you?
Well, I mentioned it before, wanting to leave it better than I found it. And that's what drives it for me and the people, is wanting to leave it better for them, not just for the organisation or the government, because I've worked in government all my career, basically. It's, a better place for people to work. And that's what it still drives my leadership and why I want to still be involved for a number of years because, without the people, we don't have an organisation no matter what you're in. And we spend a lot of time at work and I want them to enjoy themselves whilst they're at work, regardless of the risks and all the other dangers that often emergency services are placed in. I want them to enjoy what they do. So that's really important to me.
Well, thank you, Carlene. I really appreciate you being my guest today on the Human Side of Emergency Management podcast.
Thanks, Vivian.